Hello and welcome to my video of this month's soap challenge submission, the column pour. As you can probably see, I've had a lot of fun with this one and gosh, it was so satisfying to pour. But let me talk you through the process and share some of my thoughts and experiences with you. And towards the end of the video, I'll also share some footage from another take I did using this technique, so make sure not to miss this. So as I said, for this month we had to create a design using a column pour, which involved using a big wide slab mold and at least one type of column to pour our soap batter over. All sorts of columns could be used, and I've seen various shapes and sizes as well as a number of columns that others have used, each one giving the poured batter a slightly different design. I settled for a drinking bottle upside down that had a number of grooves in it, as you can see here. Now the particular video you see here is an extract from my first take. It is not the actual bottle that you will see in the video in a minute, but I didn't film this one, so this is my other take. The technique is the same. What I did, in order for my bottle not to simply float away, I used some softer soap that I had left over, and I used that as a glue, which worked quite well. Now you could also use cocoa butter or potentially a melt and pour base, or in fact have a closed container that either is already heavier by itself or that you weigh down with something inside. That would have been another good alternative as well. Once I'd prepared my mold, it was time to prepare the colors. For this particular soap, I really wanted to create some bold and strong colors, so I went for bright neon colors, pink, green and yellow, that I was going to alternate with black mica. So I needed double the amount of black because it was always going between each one of the neon colors. In terms of maths, this meant that my batter was divided into sixths, 1/6 each for the neon colors and 3/6 for the black mica content. Now what you can see here is me mixing in my colors into my oils. You may be wondering why she's not wearing gloves here, because dealing with lye and all that. But just to reassure you, this is just the melted oils. The reason why I'm doing this is that I wanted to make sure that all my colors were really mixed in very well. Now, if you do that when you already have the lye in it, you cannot do what I'm doing here right now, or you may end up with thick trays really quickly. So I have added these colors to just the melted oils. There is no lye at this point. A little piece of advice, what I didn't do here, I started with the pink and then the yellow. If you actually start with the lightest colors first, you don't have to clean your mixer in between. So do not start with a bright pink first when you then want to go on to yellow. You've also just seen me leave the mixer standing there in the oil. Now I can do that when I'm just using oils and I know it's a very stable surface and there's enough oil in my container. I would not do that if there was a lye content in there as well. Far too risky, and avoid any kind of falling over and causing splashes. So you can see here, as I say, there's the colors in, they're mixed into the oils. I've mixed them really well to make sure it's all a very smooth consistency here. This recipe I'm using here right now is just a personal one. I'm experimenting here with colors. You've seen me just scooping in with a spoon. I did not take exact measurements. It's because it's just for my own purpose. It's for my soap challenge. If this was a proper soap I wanted to sell, I would have to make sure that everything was weighed out properly and accurately recorded. Right, now on that note, trace here. A crucial aspect of the technique here is obviously trace. The batter needs to be exactly the right consistency to create the right design and the right swells. If it's too thin, well, they would all just blend together and create some muddy brown black sauce probably. But much worse actually if the batter is too thick and it's not running down the column very well, or in fact just sits on top. Ask me how I know that. So once I had my oils mixed here and I added my lye to it, I only used the mixer for a short period of time just to get it to a thin trace, and then just continued with a hand mix when I was adding the fragrance oil and just really mixing everything nicely for a thinner trace. You do not want a trace that's too thick. Now I'm just adding my fragrance oil here. I had tested this previously to make sure it doesn't accelerate trace and it doesn't discolor my soap batter. So this one here is just mixed in by hand. I did not want to risk any acceleration, any thicker trace than needed. And the whisk was just the right thing to use here. And here we have all 4 colors ready. Triple the amount of black mica compared to my neon colors due to my design. And here is my mold. You can see this is a different bottle top to the one you saw at the start of the video. I just wasn't happy enough with the grooves of that first bottle. They were not deep enough, so I was hoping that this one would create a much nicer design compared to the first one. And now this is where all the fun begins. Just watch this, it's just such a brilliant design. These grooves worked out so much better than with my first bottle, and the butter is running down perfectly. So this bottle was a great choice and creates these petal-like patterns in the mold. You can also see that my batter is just the right consistency. It's not too thin with the colors running into one another and creating some sort of muddy greenish color. They stay separate very well. And it's also not too thick, so the batter is running down really smoothly. My design was, as mentioned earlier, alternating a neon color with black mica, and at this point I was really very happy. It's just so mesmerizing to watch and was an amazing, fun part of the color pour technique. There was a slight danger of getting a little distracted here and watch the patterns develop rather than actually watching what I was pouring. What you want to make sure as well is that your color does not drip into your pattern and slightly ruin it as you change from one to another color. And you have to work at a good speed here to make sure that your batter doesn't thicken up too quickly. Just how quickly your batter thickens really just depends on a few things, like your original recipe, the kind of oils you're using. It depends on the trace you started off with, the choice of fragrance oil, and also depending on your colors. If you're using some natural colors or you're using titanium dioxide, etc., it can speed up your trace. And of course, the temperature of your batter. So there are a lot of elements to take into consideration. So working swiftly but neatly is really important. Now, whilst I let you enjoy the pouring for a little bit longer here, because if you're anything like me, you'll find this very relaxing and satisfying, let me give you some additional bits of information and tips from what I've learned during this technique. Now, if I were to make this particular technique again, I would definitely go for the same kind of bottle. This one's a 500 milliliter soft drink bottle from the supermarket, and you can see that the design comes up really nice. So the deep grooves in a bottle are an absolute winner. If you watch towards the end of the video, you will see what a difference less distinct grooves make. I cut this bottle in half and glued it in a way to the bottom to the mold using some soap that was still soft. It worked well, but as you'll see in a minute, it did come loose on one side in a moment and I had to push it back down. So if I had another option of gluing it or weighing it down with something else, I would definitely consider that. But this is such a fun technique, and as long as you have your trace right and you have tested fragrance oil and all these other aspects, then this is a really beautiful and fun technique to explore. One thing that's really important as well is that your column that you're using is high enough for you to be able to pull it out at the end of your pour. As you can see here, I have to pull it out and need to be able to have a good grip on the bottle to do so without having to actually stick my hand into the soap and ruining the design. Unless, of course, you're using a soap embed that is to stay in the soap rather than being removed. As part of our soap challenge, we took our column out at the end of the pour, like I said, unless you used the soap embed, and we were then allowed to add more of the colored batter in the center of the soap to finish it off nicely. So I just scraped out and used all my leftover colors and added them to the center before giving the whole soap a swirling pattern. Overall, this is a relatively swift technique and easy conduct. Of course, you need to prepare everything in advance and make sure you have chosen good column that works well, a good choice of colors, done all your maths and measurements, and the actual pouring is quite swift, and it needs to be because of needing a thin trace, also for the finishing touches of swirling or patterns at the end. You have been watching the video most of the time at double speed, I was actually being very careful with my finishing touches as I did not want to ruin my design. And of course, once you have committed and done any alterations, they cannot be undone. If you look into that center area now, you can see that this had become slightly muddy, greeny, due to me having pulled in the different colors from the outside, all meeting in that center. So this wasn't very pretty in the end. So I just added the last bits of scrapes of neon, yellow, green and pink to just give it a bit of a color spot in the middle again. And then right at the end, I gave my soap a little spritz of rubbing alcohol just to avoid any soda ash from developing. I was always going to shave off the top and the bottom of the soap, but preventing soda ash from developing in any way can only ever be an advantage. At the beginning of the video, I said I was going to show you some of my footage of my other soap that I had made for this challenge, and it is this one here, the white, turquoise and purple soap. I'm absolutely in love with this color combination. I mean, I really like the colors individually, but I think together they are such a stunning mix and remind me a little bit of the Northern Lights. So I will definitely add this to my choice of colors for my next assessed recipe, so for my new soap range, so watch out for this. But this was my first take of the column pour technique using the bottle that you saw right at the start of the video. That particular bottle had a different design to the one I used in my neon colored soaps. It had more shallow grooves, and because of that it did not create the pattern that I was after, the petal-like design. So when I poured my batter, there were no distinct divisions in the way I'd hoped for, and although it still created a beautiful design, I felt rather disappointed. If you look closely now, you can see that the soap batter is starting to thicken up a little bit. I had tested my fragrance oil and I knew it was not going to accelerate trace. It was a fresh linen fragrance, which is such a gorgeous smell. But I had gambled here a little bit by trialing a completely new recipe, which I can only assume was the reason for my soap batter to reach a thicker trace quicker. I also did use titanium dioxide for the white part of the soap, so that of course could have been the reason for trace getting thicker as well. But the turquoise and purple also thickened up quicker, and these were micas that really shouldn't cause any issues. As you saw right at the start, it was very fluid. I had a really nice spatter that was running down the bottle nicely. It was a thin trace, but as you can now see, the trace gets thicker and thicker as we go along. Sadly, it got too thick too quickly, too much for my liking, and the colours just didn't create the patterns that I'd been after. Don't get me wrong, the soap here, this design is beautiful. It is a really lovely soap, but as you can see here right now, it was really hard to add any other detail to it. It just wasn't quite what I'd been after for this soap challenge. And whilst I really love this soap, and as you can see on the finished photo as well, an actual really nice soap design, I just felt that the neon colored soap just met the criteria of this month's soap challenge a lot better, and so as such I submitted that one as my main submission. But I do really love both designs. Now they both have their own appeal. The neon colors here, they just really pop, and the design is lovely. It just really worked out as I'd hoped it would. The purple, turquoise and white one, obviously trace was an issue, so I would change to a different recipe next time, and ideally also use a same bottle as the one from the neon colors. I hope you've enjoyed watching this process that I have been going through with these two soaps for this month's soap challenge submission, the column pour. Any questions or comments, obviously do leave me some feedback, and you can also find me on Instagram or on my website. Thank you very much and goodbye.